Hey, grade school! What's up, everybody? It's Friday. It's Friday morning, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's one of my favorite hours of the week. I'm psyched to be with you guys. We don't need to be looking at my resolve quite yet. You guys get to look at me in all of my sleep-deprived glory. I'm glad to be with you guys today. I missed y'all last week. I woke up well, actually, no, I didn't wake up. I did this to myself on Friday morning. I was working out, felt a weird pinch in my back, and for the rest of the day, I couldn't really freely move without randomly getting like a spasm in my back that would cause me to audibly gasp. So I decided to spare you guys that vibe last week and to just wallow in my old manness. Tell you something, that did not happen to me once in my 20s. So life just keeps getting better and better. Hope you guys are doing great. It's a good day today. We're going to have some fun. We got a multitude of things to cover from the last 2 weeks of YouTube content, so I'm excited to dive in with you guys. My buddy Gadali's here with me. What's going on, Gadali?
Oh, hey. I'm just winding down from a good trip to NAB, still researching all the tech I learned about.
Yeah, you were the scout on that mission. We still have to. You gave me a little bit of some of the takeaways, but I'm excited to hear the rest of it. Excited to get to go, and it sounds like it was a good show, and there's some cool new stuff out there.
For sure. I think more about not a lot of as many new things as I had thought, but there's a lot of important details that were good to pick up on. So that was fun. Great to see the Blackmagic team as well and all their stuff they've got going on.
For sure. Depending on who you ask, God or the devil is in the details. Perhaps they both are. At any rate, that's cool. Sounds like it was a good trip, man. Glad someone got to go. Jeez. All right, well, I don't have any remarks for you guys today. I feel like I usually have something that is top of mind that I want to cover or set straight or show you guys. I got nothing like that today, so I'm going to kick it to the room. What kind of questions we got out there? Anybody want to? What do y'all want to learn about today?
Ooh, we've got a question, or at least a comment, perhaps, from Lester saying, I tried the composite mode you described in the video. I wish there was a shorthand on what each of the items do. Some are obvious by scrolling over, others are not. So I suppose the question is, how do I learn what composite modes do? What's the math behind them?
Yeah, that's a great question to ask. So this is one of those areas where we have to be sort of cautious when and how we use Wikipedia, and certainly when and how we recommend Wikipedia. But in this case, if you literally Google in Wikipedia blend modes, it will tell you the explicit math that underlies every one of the blend modes that you're going to find in Resolve that really are all coming from an institution that was developed from the Adobe ecosystem. But that's where the easiest way to learn about it. As you said, like you can kind of pick off and start with the easiest ones, like with, multiply and divide. Those ones are pretty obvious. And, since we were talking about blend modes for a second, I actually did a whole series on mixing light that it might be fun to sort of revisit the theme of here on the channel at some point. Where we did this series on mixing light that was called Visual Math. By the way, if you guys aren't on mixinglight.com or haven't had a chance to check it out, it's a really, really good resource that tends to have sometimes more structured material than we get the chance to do on YouTube. So I definitely encourage checking it out. In particular, that Visual Math series, if you want to get more of a practical sense of how I use different blend modes to do all kinds of zany, interesting things. But like as one specific example, by the way, I'm back here in good old safe and sound Resolve 18, whatever it is, 18.1, not 18.5, not the beta. I'm only brave when it comes to exploring the beta release so that we can talk about it on YouTube. When it comes to my color grading business, I'm quite cautious about bumping things or upgrading things before the dust has settled, and I encourage that for you guys as well. So I'm back here in 18.1, but we can still look at blend modes for a second here, and we can look at a simple example of specifically what the multiply blend mode would do. So for this exercise, let me render my image visible. So check this out. I'm going to go into, let me simplify a little bit. I've got my template node tree here that you guys are accustomed to seeing. Now I've just got an empty node tree. I'm within some color management, but otherwise nothing else is going on. I'm going to create a layer mixer because prior to 18.5, that's the only way to use a blend mode. And I'm going to, before I change my blend mode, I'm going to go into my open effects here, and I forget what this is called, but it's like a color generator, I want to say. Yeah, color generator, aptly named. we're going to go in here and we are going to look at this color value. And let's just set this, we're on a scale of 0 to 255 right now for this value. Just bear with me. I'm going to set this to 128 for all three channels. So essentially 50%. Okay. If anyone knows what I'm doing already, then good on you, because I barely know what I'm doing because this idea just now came to me. So we've got everything set to a 128, which is 50%, right? 50. If the max is 255, 255 divided by 2 would be roughly 127.5, but what's half a value between friends? So if we look at our layer mixer right now, we're in the normal blending mode, which simply says, look at bottom pixel and look at top pixel, and top pixel wins every time, right? That's like the simplest blending mode that we can use. That's the normal blending mode. But if we wanted to use multiply, I'm going to pose this question to you guys. By the way, I think we briefly touched on it 2 weeks ago in our last episode of grade school. We just did CCA, the Colorist Career Accelerator, earlier this month, and boy, was it fun. One of the many things that I find fun about the Colorist Career Accelerator is that we get to interact. I love interacting with you guys, and unfortunately, we don't get to do a ton of it here in grade school, because if I set the latency mode to low, then the quality of the stream goes down and everybody complains and gets mad at me after the fact, and I can't handle anyone being mad at me. I make enough mistakes as it is. So I won't have time necessarily to hear you answer the question, but I do want to ask you the question and give you a second to think about the answer. What is going to happen to this image if I set my composite mode to multiply right now? Give it to me in like, what am I effectively going to be doing? Or another way to think about it would be, how could I do what you are about to see using conventional tools instead of Resolve? Just think about that for a second. And just because I love the interaction, I'm going to open up this YouTube feed, and maybe it'll actually be faster than I think. Probably not. What it's going to do is apply a gain factor. Oh, there we go. Elijah's on the right track. We're going to apply a gain factor. So let's set this composite mode to multiply, like so. Now, are we going to run into the good old-fashioned, no, okay, good. I thought we were going to run into the slightly odd behavior of the layer mixer sometimes when we were in a project-level color-managed setting. So what are we doing here? We have a constant. That's what this generator really is up top. It's a constant set to effectively 50%, slightly more than 50%. And what the multiply blend mode does is say, take bottom layer and multiply it by top layer, like so. So what does that mean? Well, those of you guys who have hung out with me before or have gone into geeky side missions with me talking about image math and the way that math is used to manipulate images and the way it relates to our primaries, you know that multiplication and gain are two terms for the same thing, right? So effectively, what we are doing when we multiply by a constant of roughly 50% is applying a gain factor of 0.5. So if I grab a still here and then wipe this all out, let's see if I know what I'm talking about. Let's nudge this. Let's put it to a 0.51 to get as close to the factor that we were operating with before, and let's see if we get a similar result. It's slightly different here. So there is a multiplication going on there, but why that's different, I don't quite know. Because that should match right up. That bothers me a little bit. Well, regardless, that's an adventure for another day. It turns out we can find that gain factor. It could be a question of how that constant is being computed, but it turns out a 0.79 gain factor gets me a dead match to what we did with the multiply blend mode, or at least very close to it. So it may be a question of like some other type of math that's going on under the hood. But regardless, if you want to get familiar with the math that underlies the blending modes, that Wikipedia, Google Wikipedia blend modes, and that will give you that math. And then, of course, you can just kind of naively experiment with things. I'll be honest with you, I don't have every single one of the math functions memorized for all the different blend modes. However, especially with the release of that new feature that we were talking about in Resolve 18.5, I have already started doing something, at least for the day or two that I had 18.5 installed on a machine this week. I've already started going in and being like, I don't know, try that one. If it makes something interesting, then I'll come up with an excuse for why it's okay for me to do it later. That's my favorite thing about that blend modes thing, is it really forces you into a realm of just subjective creativity. And unless you are a exceptionally astute mathematics person, you're probably not going to know what that blend mode is doing mathematically off the top of your head. So all you're left with is like, well, is it doing something interesting? And now that becomes a sensible place to go like, oh, well, what is that basis for that interesting thing? Anyway, I've been going on about blend modes for a minute now, but that would be how I would kind of bite off getting more familiar with the blend modes, both on an aesthetic and a more mathematical basis.
Question from Thatcher. What operations are safe or unsafe in a parallel mixer?
Yeah, so that's one that I definitely wanted to touch on today. So I've been trying to think of a way to like simply explain this because it's a little bit slippery. Because even when I think the terminology I used in my recent video was like, oh, spatial operations aren't so good. But that's not really quite right, because if I'm back in my template node tree here, I could do a power window down below and, whatever, like maybe I want to do an outside window on my subject here and knock things down around her. That's fine. That's not causing any problem whatsoever. And isn't a power window spatial by definition? So here's the closest sort of concept, the simplest concept that I've currently got in my mind in terms of being able to explain it. On a sort of programming basis, the thing that we want to avoid doing in a parallel node is any operation which doesn't work on the basis of individual pixels. So let me just give you an example of what that is and what that isn't. So a gain, for example, we were just looking at gain. This operation, under the hood, this operation is actually just being applied 1 pixel at a time. So if we imagine the sort of like inner consciousness of Resolve, it's really only conscious when we are applying this gain operation of 1 pixel at a time. It's doing what I ask. It's literally taking, like, let's say, like this, like some pixel here and like the liner of her mitten. Let's say for argument's sake that it is a 1, 0, 0, full red, no green, no blue. It's not that tidy, but let's say that's the triplet. All that we are doing is multiplying red times 0.92, green times 0.92, and blue times 0.92. And as a result, in that case, we're going to get 0.9200 because 0 times anything is still 0. But my point there with the gain operation is that's just happening pixel by pixel. So that pixel is going to get evaluated and have that math applied to it. Then it's going to walk 1 pixel over and do the same thing, and then another pixel over from there, and so on and so forth. And it's going to do it 1,920 times in the case of this canvas across, and then it's going to repeat that sequence of 1,920 steps 1,080 times. So it's literally just going pixel by pixel by pixel. That is a single pixel operation. Any operation that works that way is cool. And that's honestly most operations inside of Resolve. When I say spatial, what I'm really talking about are operations where to perform the adjustment of any 1 pixel, which is still happening, the math needs to evaluate nearby pixels. So the easiest example of this, and the one that I made in the video on this subject, would be blur. The way that you blur an image is you look at the pixels around the pixel that you're currently evaluating. So that's what I mean when I say spatial. I mean the operation itself is having to know not only the value of the pixel it is currently manipulating, but the value of pixels around it in order for the operation to work. So a short list of those, just kind of like running through here in Resolve, that would be blur, that would be your texture pop tool. Interestingly, that would actually be your shadows and your highlights inside of your primaries. They're kind of an exception to what would generally be fair play here in the primaries, because while these are a tonal adjustment, they have a textural component to them. They are changing the texture, the relationship between the pixels as opposed to just the pixels themselves. So shadows and highlights would be off limits. For the same reason, midtone detail would be off limits, because that's making a textural manipulation. And really, texture is the operational word that you can think of when you're deciding whether to do this. We already talked about contrast pop. Noise reduction, same thing. That is a interpixel adjustment. It is looking at pixels to the left, to the right, above and below the current pixel. Any of those things, anything with blurring, sharpening, noise reduction, texture, and as I said, a kind of bonus that in a group that would generally be fair play would be the shadows and highlights, just because those do happen to have a textural component. Now, how do you know in the case of tools like that? I don't actually know. It probably is written down in the manual somewhere, although I haven't checked in a little while. But these are the two that I'm aware of, shadows and highlights, that are not just like, put it this way, highlights are not just a narrower form of gain. Highlights are sculpting the top end of the image, but they are also blurring and or sharpening the top end of the image depending on where that knob is placed. So that would be my short list of things that we really don't want to be doing in the parallel node structure, because if you drive them hard enough, you're going to end up getting that type of ringing that I called out in this past week's video. It's possible that I'm missing something there, or that my definition could be simpler or more complete, but that's a pretty good roadmap for you. If you keep those things offloaded downstream of the parallel node stack over here, you should be in pretty good shape.
Switching gears, question from Gonzalo. What is the best way to practice for beginners in the colorist world? Should they start with matching other movie clips and things like that, or something else? What's going to be the most helpful?
Oh, I'm really glad that we're talking about this. I've been thinking about practice a lot lately. Here's what I would say. One really good way to practice, if you look at, I was actually, it's funny, I was just talking with a colorist friend yesterday about how no colorist who I or they know came up in their career via a so-called traditional path. So like the idea of saying there is a traditional path is sort of meaningless, because I don't know anybody who had the sort of like, well, I worked in a post house and I was a runner, and then I was a tape room guy, and then or a tape room gal, and then I was an assist, and then I was a second, and then I was, a junior, and then a second, and then a lead, and then a senior, and then a supervising. I don't really know anybody who came up by that prescribed fashion, that the kind of canned answer as to like, how do you make it in the color grading business? However, those people do exist. They're just in an awfully small minority. One of the advantages that people who do have that quote unquote traditional career path, one of the advantages that they enjoy is that they are typically given a very, very finite set of parameters within which to accomplish a goal. So I'll give you this example. I can tell you pretty definitively that if you think about like any senior level, supervising level artist at a big shop like Company 3 or Harbor or Picture Shop, any of these kind of places, they are by preference going to be involved prior to production. They're going to build the showlet, as we've talked about here on the channel before, and they not only are going to get involved prior to production, build the showlet, give that context for working on set, they in many cases are actually going to be working with the DIT and saying, hey, here is how I want you to grade this. Here are the tools that I would like you to use. Here are the tools that I don't want you to use. And what I can tell you guys from my personal experience, while I didn't necessarily have that full traditional path, the time that I have spent working under senior colorists, when at the time I was a junior or just a regular, garden variety colorist, one of the things that I found the most beneficial there is when I was being a second on a show or a commercial or whatever for one of those senior colorists, is it's their show, right? So they're not going to be bashful about like, all right, Cullen, you're here to help me out. You're here to help me get through shots. I trust your eye, but you're going to do this by my book. So they've got their look. They've got the way they like to work. They've got their template node tree a lot of the time. They have their tools that they like and their tools that they avoid, and they will give me all of that. And that was some of the best practice I ever got, was being told, hey, make a pass through this 30-minute episode of the show or whatever it is. Here are the tools that are in bounds for you. Everything else is out of bounds. You may not use it. So you can actually impose that same sort of structure on yourself if you think about it. And one very sensible form of it that I think is amazing practice, no matter how new or experienced you are as a colorist, is to do what I'm always talking about here on the channel. Set up your color management, set up an overall look, whether that's my free 2383 or my Voyager or something else that you trust that is designed to work in a scene referred color managed space, and just work through these three guys right here. exposure ratio balance. We just got finished talking about this in the Colorist Career Accelerator. Your goal, if you're really serious about becoming an excellent colorist, your goal should be that you're getting 80, by the time you've got color management, look, and these 3 nodes dialed in, you're 80% done. Does that sound hard? Does that sound like a big bar to hit? It kind of is. That's why it's so important to practice getting to a really, really good place with your images on a consistent basis and getting them to agree with each other using just these 3 nodes. So that would be one form of that broader sort of assignment that I got a few times in my career, and that traditional colorists get lots of practice with, of like, hey, go and grade these shots, go and grade this timeline using all these tools are off limits. So that's, I think, the ideal way to practice, as opposed to like this thing that we see a lot on YouTube, this sort of like forensic comparison of like, how are we going to make this random frame from my edit match this random frame from this movie that we like? That to me is there's a lot of problems there, but it is certainly, like, you can call that whatever it is, whatever you want, but it is certainly not practice. It is something else completely. Hope that helps.
Dimitri is wondering, what about the qualifier? Can we use that in a parallel node scenario?
Yes, absolutely. Because the qualifier, you know, I'm glad you're asking, because it really is a slippery sort of distinction. But the qualifier is not looking at, you know, like, remember, the qualifier is making a qualification. It doesn't need to know about the pixels around it in order to do its job. Let's imagine a 1 pixel, or that's not a great analogy. No, the qualifier does not need to analyze pixels around it in order to do its job. It just needs to analyze the pixel that it's currently operating on based on its hue, sat, and luminance. And then we're just going to do whatever we do. Now, the only exception there is if you marry the qualifier with those outlaws that we talked about a moment ago. So if you qualify and then you blur that qualified region, problem. If you qualify and then you do mid-tone detail or shadows or highlights or any of those things that we talked about, that's no good. But if you qualify and you work your primaries, or you do anything else that's in bounds, then that's fair play and you shouldn't have any issue using it in a parallel node.
All right. Let's see. Question from Big Dog Films. Would you please comment on the flavors of Rec 709? Specifically, what does it mean when something is seen, Rec 709A? Are those for acquisition or delivery?
Yeah, I'm glad we talked about this. So we could literally spend the rest of grade school talking about the intricacies and plot twists of the Rec 709 standard and the way it has evolved. But I'll try to put a tidy sort of thumbnail on it. Rec 709 was originally a capture standard, but even more significantly than that, Rec 709 actually did not have a transfer function specified in it. And that's what you're asking about right now. Any of the Rec 709 standards that we are talking about, I'm just going to give you a big long list right now of the ones off the top of my dome. Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, Rec 709 Gamma 2.2, sRGB, Rec 709A, Rec 709 Scene. Those are just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. There might even be others. All of those color spaces, their primaries, their color gamut. By the way, was anybody in the color management workshop that I ran with Blackmagic Design earlier this week? Give a shout if you were. We had a good time. But as we talked about in that class, as we've talked about here on the channel, the primaries or the color gamut are one of the 2 ingredients that you need to know on an explicit numerical basis in order to fully define a color space. And of course, that's what Rec 709 is, a color space. So all of those different Rec 709 color spaces have the exact same gamut, exact same primaries. The only difference between those 2 is the transfer function, or the gamma curve, or the tone curve, whatever you want to call it. And what I can say is, if we work backwards from the knowns and the standards out to the slightly less knowns, Gamma 2.4 is the standard to which we generally grade and master our images, sometimes called BT 1886, but BT 1886 in its simplest form is a pure Gamma 2.4 curve, okay? And that literally Gamma 2.4, if you want to get mathy about it, that means you are taking your input value and raising it to the power of, anybody remember exponents from high school? I slept through high school. I really wish I hadn't, because I rely on math a lot these days. But we are taking that input and raising it to the power of 1 divided by the gamma factor. So in this case, it would be y equals x to the power of 1 divided by 2.4. Okay, so that would be a gamma 2.4. That's the standard that we all grade to. Gamma 2.2, exact same thing. It's just 2.2 instead of 2.4. And as long as what you are sending and what your monitor is expecting align, that can work fine as well. It's just a slightly different response. Those are the knowns. It gets a little trickier when we look at sRGB, for example. sRGB is close to a gamma of 2.1, except it's not a simple gamma function, and it has like a messy little toe business down in the bottom end. So it's a slightly different encoding curve that I would generally encourage avoiding and staying away from. And then if we look at some of the others, Rec 709A is using what was sort of like informally agreed upon across the industry as the original curve of Rec 709 before we had a actual explicit standard for it. That number happens to be around is it a 1.9? We got some smart people in the room today. Someone correct me if I'm getting that number wrong. It's around a gamma of a 1.9 if memory serves. So that would be Rec 709A. Now Rec 709, and for that reason, that is not a standard that you should master to. There's generally not displays that have a gamma 1.8 response out there. Most displays are going to have a gamma 2.4 or a gamma 2.2 response, or a response that's close to one of those, as opposed to being a 1.8. That would be quite rare. Then the last one that we could look at would be Rec 709 Scene. Now, I recently had cause to doubt myself on this one, and I haven't gone back yet to check. My understanding was that Rec 709 Scene and Rec 709A are the same, sort of roughly 1.8-ish gamma, but I actually am not going to say that definitively right now because I feel like I want to go back and check. I think where I heard someone suggest that Rec 709 Scene is actually some other gamma function. I don't remember. It's a lot of tone curves. So which of those should you use? How much of all this stuff do you need to know as well or better than I do? I don't think you need to remember much of that stuff. I think the important thing to say is we have to grade to standards. We have to send what our monitor expects, and then we can switch and grade to another standard if we want. So one common example, one simple way that we do things here at my company is my reference monitor is calibrated to gamma 2.4. I send Rec 709 gamma 2.4 to that reference monitor. And in cases where a deliverable is primarily going to be for the web, there are a couple of things that I will look at doing, but one of them that we do most commonly is we simply change that gamma 2.4 to a gamma 2.2 because we know that's going to be the most common response of displays that are going to view that content. So that is far from a comprehensive and probably far from a tidy summary of all the different tone curves, transfer functions, gamma curves that we can encounter with Rec 709. But that's what I would really keep in mind as kind of like the takeaway is like, we now do have a standard. Rec 709 calls for BT 1880, or what it really BT 1886 is the proper term for Rec 709. The tone curve that color space calls for is a gamma 2.4 in the ideal simplest form. So that's really what we should be grading to, unless we know that we are grading to a gamma 2.2 type of standard. And those others, those might be useful for input transforms, or they might be useful for troubleshooting things, but you really don't need to think about any of those other spaces nearly as much as, is this 2.4 or 2.2? Hope that's helpful.
And Tyler says, when transforming log footage with CSTs, luminance mapping washes out highlights. I found drawing a custom curve and luminance mapping to match the log state is the best to bring them back, but I'm wondering, is there a better way?
Ooh! Well, you're touching on my favorite subject in the world, which is curves. I found myself repeating multiple times this week that God is a curve. Everything is curves. And really what you're talking about can be most easily sort of understood if you look at a what we could call a parameterized curve, meaning a curve that we're drawing with input parameters as opposed to freehanding with the custom curves. So this will take a minute, but this is valuable. Let's talk about what is being called out here. So what we're seeing when you identify this, for a moment, I'm going to bypass my color management, okay? And we can all see this, right? Yep, good. Now, let's go in and do a color space transform. And let's do the world's most useless color space transform. I'm going to go from DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate, to DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate. This is a very exciting do-nothing CST. My waveform's not changing, scopes aren't changing, image isn't changing, right? Now, all I want to do on top of this, because it's all I want to evaluate right now, is luminance mapping, as we talked about. And let's make an extreme example. Let's say we're going to go from a custom max input of 10,000 down to a max output of 100. This is what the question is identifying. Like, oh, my highlights are getting flattened or milked out, right? Well, yes, but when we are using this properly, this is so that we can fit into a domain that we need for display or for a color space transfer function. So I'm going to give you an easy example that I just happen to know off the top of my head. Let's say we want to go to Cineon. Has anyone ever messed around with Cineon before? Maybe you've seen that workflow where people suggest transforming into Rec 709 Cineon to tee up for a film look-a-lot. We're going to mess around with Cineon here in just a second if I can remember what in the world I'm doing and find my grayscale ramp. And what we're going to do now is we're going to keep all this junk the same. We're just going to change our output gamma to Cineon. Now check this out. Look what's happening. My original signal is starting here. It's just a nice, clean, pure linear ramp from 0 to 1. But by the time we move into Cineon, which has a lower dynamic range, those original bits, some of them are crashing right through the ceiling, right? You can see we're hitting that ceiling hard. So this is a case where even though if you're just grossly evaluating it visually, you're like, oh, well, it's just mushing my highlights. If that's the best that your system can do, as in the case of a tone curve like Cineon, then that's actually desirable because you don't typically want hard clipped highlights. It would be better to do the minimum amount of luminance mapping that you needed to in order to fit this into the system. And do not ask me why I know what that number is off the top of my head in Cineon. I've spent far too much time trying to emulate film LUTs. But you can see now we are rolling this in. Now, if I only look at this on a visual basis, and I look at luminance mapping off versus on, in this case, in this particular image, it's not super visible. Maybe if I zoom in here, I would see it a little bit more. Off, on. Yeah, it's not even visible just because there don't happen to be pixels that are that bright in this image, but it's something you certainly could observe in the right image. And if all you're doing is looking at it visually, then the conclusion that is being reached in the question is quite reasonable. Like, well, why would I want that? Why would I want to mush my highlights? You would want to mush your highlights if you don't have a choice, basically. So that could be a tone curve like Cineon, which can't accommodate all the dynamic range of your other one. A more common one here, Log C. Log C, or log C3, I should say, it cannot accommodate 10,000 nits. It can only accommodate up to about 5,500 nits. We can see that here as well. So if we do not do any tone mapping here, and we turn our ramp back on, you're going to see same thing. We're crashing through the ceiling. So in this case, we would want to go from 10,000, and we could go as high as 5,500 on the output, and now we're going to fit inside of the available dynamic range of that destination. Okay, so that's two examples in the abstract of just tone curves that need that. But the bigger one, the main thing that I use luminance mapping for, that I think about luminance mapping for, is for my display. Because essentially my display can only go up to, if I'm in SDR, it can only go up to 100 nits. So even though I might look at this, and if we sort of flesh this out, if I look at this, I'm like, oh, I'm like flattening the heck out of my highlights. It's like, well, it's either that or clip the heck out of your highlights because your display cannot show code values which come in higher than 1. And in this case, that's what this value of 100 correlates to, is a code value of 1. All right. So back to your original question now that we've got some context in place. If we talk about like, oh, well, I found that by stacking custom curves with my highlights, or rather stacking custom curves with my luminance mapping, I can get a better looking result. I'm going to show you guys a tool that hasn't been shown outside of the Colorist Career Accelerator, which we were just talking about, but I'll share it with you guys here today. Let's actually look at, that's not the one that I want. We're going to look at this guy. Now, this is a tool called High-Low Trim. It exists for the explicit purpose of trimming in highlights either on a creative or a technical basis, really more on a creative basis. And you can see that as I drop this down, if I start to go to like a full negative 0.5, I'm most readily affecting my, like sources in frame like this, but it's also going to even begin to affect skin and stuff. But here's what you can do, and this is why I'm such a fan of curves. I'm scaling. You can see what my curve is doing, right? Like here or there. I'm literally just smoothly bending that curve down like so. But check this out. If I go to my roll strength param, I can max out the luminance within this range. So I'm still keeping things confined to a max of this for whatever creative or technical reason I might want to, but I can increase my shoulder strength and perceptually, not just perceptually, in reality, get hotter highlights up to this point. And if I go hard enough, I'm getting dangerously close to really just having a hard shelf at the top of my curve. But that's the phenomenon that you are witnessing by stacking a custom curve with luminance mapping, is you are effectively increasing the shoulder strength of that luminance mapping that we have happening in Resolve, which, by the way, there's no parameter for in the color space transform inside of Resolve. There's no parameter for shoulder strength of luminance map. That would actually be kind of cool if it was an option, but we don't have it available. So that's a very long way of saying, good job. If you're getting highlights that feel pingier and have more life while pairing with luminance mapping that's fitting you into the proper domain, I think you've arrived at a very sensible and very advantageous scheme for getting the image that you want. So I hope you guys enjoyed that grand tour of luminance mapping, domain, and all things curves. God is a curve. Hashtag God is a curve.
Nate is wondering if you can explain OOTF, especially where it might concern HLG footage in an unmanaged CST workflow.
Ooh, yes, I can. So let's talk about OOTF for a second. OOTF, opto-optical transfer function. That's catchy, right? OOTF is a sort of companion to terms that are a little more common. EOTF and OETF, electro-optical transfer function, and opto-electrical transfer function. Those ones make a little more sense. If we think about electro-optical, that's a transfer function that's meant to take you from code values to something visible, right? So that's like the gamma 2.4 we were talking about in Rec 709 earlier. That's an electro-optical transfer function. That's how we're getting from code values to something visible. Opto-electrical transfer function, that would be something like log C3. That's how we are getting from something optical, visible out in the real world into an encoded value. And the transfer function describes the way that we map those luminance values as they climb in strength. Okay, so those are the more kind of easy ones to understand. So if we now know what an EOTF is and an OETF is, what the heck is an OOTF? We're going from opto to opto, opto-optical transfer function. What does that mean? The more common term for this that I was familiar, the only term for this that I knew before OOTF was introduced in Resolve 15 or 16, somewhere around there, was system gamma. It turns out that for a variety of reasons, like I just want you guys to imagine like everything that we do in motion imaging, like let's use my beautiful mug as an example here. I'm standing in a physical space in an actual room right now, and I'm looking at a camera lens, and the hope, fingers crossed, is that you guys on the other end are seeing a linear reproduction of what you would see if you were standing where my camera lens is standing, right? That's kind of the whole baseline of motion imaging. Without that, we don't have much. So in that scenario, the most naive sort of like prescription that we could give would be, well, in that scenario, we would want an opto-optical transfer function, an end-to-end system gamma, if you like, of 1, right? Don't change it. Show me what it looked like to be standing there. As it turns out, because of the limitations of displays, because they don't have as much dynamic range, because we are looking at those displays in different levels of environment with different levels of ambient light that are causing flare on the screen, it's actually advantageous to have a system gamma which is greater than 1, so that you have a little bit of additional contrast in the final image. There's no hard prescription for this, but generally speaking, we could go back to our Rec 709 conversation and say that a very common system gamma would be, I'm doing that the wrong way actually. Let's look at a 2.4 divided by 1.96, as I saw a couple of you guys fine-tuned my my value on a moment ago. 2.4 divided by 1.96, that's around a 1.2. So what that means is that all things being equal, if This is the original scene, what I'm looking at right now. Let's build this thing. Let's do something here. So I'm going to do this with a CST for a moment. Instead of, I've got my color management bypassed, and I'm going to just do some simple shot level color management for a second here. Just want to make sure all my stuff is off. Okay, cool. So we're going to do an output of DaVinci wide gamut to 709 using a color space transform. And we're also going to do, actually, let's just make this really simple. We're just going to do it in one step. We're going to go directly from camera, which is log C3, straight out to Rec 709 gamma 24. Okay. Here's my CST. And as you can see, I've got this forward OOTF turned on. Let's grab a still of that. Let's turn that off. And this is not going to be exact because of where that OOTF is being applied. But if I now go in and I apply a numerical gamma factor using a tool that lets me do that, and I put in a gamma of around a, in this case, it would be a, whatever that original value was, a 1 divided by 1.2, around a 0.81, like so. I'm going to get in the neighborhood of the system gamma of that OOTF. So the OOTF is really just a way of prescribing a traditional system gamma. And I think it actually is a 1.2. It just happens to be applied at a slightly different point in the image than I'm applying it right here. But that would be the idea there, is the OOTF is the end-to-end gamma of the image. Now, to round out the answer, you're asking about HLG footage that you were then reading back in. Well, this is where working with HLG as an acquisition format is kind of tricky, because when you think about, oh, and something just clicked in my brain as well that I'll come back to. When you think about HLG is a display standard, which means it probably has had some type of system gamma imparted into it. At least if it's like, if I say, hey, here's the HLG master of, like Cullen's new Hulu series that I've just gone out and made, it's going to have a system gamma applied to it because it's meant to have slightly more gamma or contrast than the original image did. But if I'm giving you footage that was shot in HLG, I don't actually know, maybe you guys know in the room, it's not entirely clear to me whether I should expect that system gamma has been applied to that image, or more likely that HLG is simply being used as a reasonably efficient and dynamic way of encoding a source image in a like camera negative high quality state. I would expect more of the latter, in which case you would not want to use OOTF inverse or forward when you are like input color space transforming, when you're color managing that image. But I actually don't know that for sure, and you might have to go as naive as trying both and seeing which one generally looks better on your material for a particular camera. But that's kind of the rub with how I would treat that HLG application in particular. And just in general, here's a good rule of thumb if you don't want to think about all that junk that I just said about OOTFs. These two options that we have down here, these come into play when we are in two situations. We are going from a scene or camera space into a display space. That's what we're doing here. We're going from area wide gamma 3, area log C3 into a display space. Or we are going from a display space into a camera space, such as area log C3, DaVinci wide gamut intermediate, whatever it may be. In that case, we may not, but that's where one case where we might want to use an inverse OOTF. In that first situation that I summarized of going from scene to display, we're almost always going to want to use a forward OOTF because system gamma is generally our friend. It's a pretty well agreed upon convention after, a century or so of it happening. We have system gamma actually all the way back in film days. And in that case, you're talking about a very dim image in a room with very controlled lighting. And the system gamma, it turns out, of a film print is going to come out to, I believe, top of my dome, right around that same value of about a 1.2. So there you have it. More than you ever wanted to know about OOTFs.
Sticking with the topic of color space transforms, Yurtsever is asking, should I use white point adaptation for going from DaVinci wide gamut to P3?
Well, that's a good question to ask because P3 has more than one sort of conventional white point that you might that a display or a standard might want depending on what you're doing with it. Rec 709, like there's really not a Rec 709 like D60 standard, for example, or a Rec 709 DCI standard. So we just know when we do Rec 709, we're going to want D65. For P3, it kind of depends on what you're doing, and you can even see it if you look at the color space. We've got P3 D60, P3 D65, and P3 DCI. So you want to make sure, I would say, if you are confident you have selected the correct P3 of these three options, these are white points, by the way. D60 is slightly warmer than D65. D65 is what we set our reference monitors to. It's what most color spaces are pointed to, like that we're going to generally be working with. DCI is a projection standard, which is like slightly greener in character. So as long as you are confident that you have selected the right P3, the one with a white point that reflects your needs, then I generally would turn a P3 white point adaptation on. Otherwise, effectively what you're going to be doing, like let's paint this with some specifics just to make it a little bit easier. Let's say we're going to do a P3 DCI gamma 26 DCP, for example, okay? Something for a theatrical projection. We'll say this is going to go to P3. If I do not turn my white point adaptation on here, what I'm going to be doing is simulating the white point of my source on my destination. So even though on this hypothetical projector that I'm mastering this image for, a triplet of 1, 1, 1 equals the white point of DCI, I'm now going to be sending my white through the system not at a 1, 1, 1, but at the code value, which will cause that projector to reproduce the same white point as my source. If that sounds slippery, it kind of is. It probably took me 24 times of having someone explain that to me before it kind of clicked. So that's a very long way of giving an answer that I could very briefly give, of saying yes. If you're going into a P3 space and you know you have selected the right flavor of P3, then use white point adaptations so that your source white is being mapped onto the white point that is native to that device that you are mastering for.
Moving over to contrast. Praveen is wondering, how do you play with pivot to find the right amount of contrast? Is keeping it at the right amount for the working color space not enough?
Ooh, yes. I'm really glad this one has been coming up a lot lately, and I sort of feel I really want to get on the record loud and clear as often as I need to for you guys. Like, I can be very prescriptive in the way that I talk about what we do, and I really do believe that you guys have probably heard me share that like David Fincher quote that like there are not a million ways to do things. There are two, and one of them is wrong. Like, I really do feel that way so much in my practice, and I do believe in optimal solutions to things, and I try to impart that to you guys. But I also have tried to be very consistent, and want to continue to emphasize to y'all that by the time we get, let's just kind of go back to a stock grading setup here. We've got color management in place. I'm going to go in and pick out a tasty Voyager LUT, so I got a little bit of a vibe going on. My current favorite is this Canberra thing. I'm going to scale back the key output gain a little bit. By the time I am here, there is nothing, and I mean nothing, sacred about the pivot of my contrast ratio. It is all about what feels good in my hands. Everything that I've done up until this point has been done in the name of giving me a level position to grade from, so that when I start to work contrast, pivot, or exposure, I'm not inadvertently having to compensate for bumps that I made in the pipeline when I set up the color management or the overall look. But now that I'm here, the only thing that matters is how I feel and how my client feels. So I don't know what pivot I land on for most shots, because I just grab these two knobs and twist them until I like what I'm seeing. So I not only would I say it's not enough to anchor at middle gray, I'd say that's often not going to be appropriate. Like, contrast and exposure are interrelated. And even though I talk to you guys about like, well, if you set your exposure, then you shouldn't need to work your pivot as hard. Set that where you want it to go, and then just feel free to like work your contrast and your pivot. I never have a hand on just one of these knobs. I always have a hand on both, because I'm just honestly looking at the image. It's a variation like contrast pivot. You guys will know this if you've heard me talk about the math behind these things in the past. Contrast pivot, that's really just an alternate form of lift and gain. It's like literally the exact same math, just in a different form. And same thing, like I would never go in and make a lift gain kind of contrast feel-based adjustment and take one hand off the wheel. They interact with each other. They're actually supposed to. It's a good thing. Same thing with contrast pivot. But that's a long way of saying, like, by the time you are grading contrast ratio at the individual node level, there is no forbidden pivot point. And here's something else that I will do. Like, I do this all the time. If I want to make a gain adjustment, usually what I will do is I will, like, before I even start doing stuff, like this image is actually a decent example. Like, let's just reset this node. I would look at this image and be like, all right, by the time we've exposed up, like let's say we wanted to go a little more open with the exposure, I could definitely see myself looking at this image and being like, you know what, like the overall weight feels pretty good. It just needs a little bit of a broad trim in the highlights. Before I even turn my contrast, I'm going to set my pivot to 0 and then start dropping down. What am I doing there? Answer to yourself. If I'm doing a contrast adjustment where I'm pivoting around 0, what am I doing? Assuming that in this case, my S-curve contrast is set to off. I'm just doing gain, right? But what's fun is if I feel like I'm doing gain, but I want to keep a little bit more, I want to like finesse that a little bit. This is where there's an advantage over using gain when we use contrast pivot, because now I can make that pivot just slightly higher than 0 without needing to change the adjustment over here. And now my adjustment is taking a little bit of contrast, a little bit of weight out of the bottom end as well, even though it's taking most of the weight out of the high end because my pivot is set at a rather low value. So I hope that's some helpful, just sort of like, I want to give you like the blessing, the creative freedom to go and twist and turn contrast pivot wherever you want them. Get a good color managed pipeline, get a good look in place, set exposure where you want to see it, and then wherever your hands lead you in the contrast pivot or in your ratio node in general, you should feel totally free to go there.
All right, moving over to output. BG is wondering, should we set the output to sRGB if we want to deliver to Instagram, YouTube, or the internet in general?
No. I want to link you guys to a video that is really good. That one of my, do you guys know about my, I'm sure some of y'all in the room know about my color science crushes. I've got a few color science crushes out there. One of them is a really sharp dude at Filmlight called Daniele Sirigusano. Daniele has a video that I'm going to try to dig up for you guys in post where he breaks down the whole gamma tag and, like sRGB standard. I would say just avoid sRGB entirely, because even if a display's actual, this is the crazy thing about sRGB, and I'm sorry that there's not a simple way to explain this. The beauty, one thing that's really nice about a gamma function, let's just talk about gamma. Let's talk about the simple version of this first. If I tell you I'm grading to Rec 709 gamma 24, what that means is that I'm applying a gamma 24 function to my image on its way out the door, right? And what that also means, if I'm using it correctly, is that my display is going to do the perfect inverse of that. So that the net result is what? Linear. Nothing changed, right? Just pure linear in and out, setting aside the OOTF thing that we were talking about earlier. It's just gamma 2.4 on the output, gamma of 1 over 2.4 in terms of the display response, so that the net is linear. Same with gamma 2.2. It is, to use some fancy terminology, it is a symmetrical encode and decode. sRGB depends on who you ask, but it is not guaranteed to have a symmetrical encode and decode. Some standards, some displays, some experts will say until they're red in the face that the sRGB standard calls for an encode of an ugly little function that you can look up if you really want to see the math. It's an ugly compound function that can't be described by a simple gamma curve, and then a decode of gamma 2.2. Then others will say, no, you should be decoding the exact inverse of that forward function. But there is not agreement there, and I've heard enough smart people debate it on either side that I don't want to get involved. I don't want to deal with that at all. So that in and of itself, for me, is the reason why I'm like, just avoid the sRGB thing, just do gamma 2.2. Because even if you do sRGB, flip a coin as to whether it's going to be decoded as sRGB or decoded as gamma 2.2. So at least half that time you're going to be better off or no worse off than if you had selected gamma 2.2. I know that's complicated stuff, but again, I'm trying to give you guys like thumbnails at the end of each of these. Skip sRGB. If you're trying to get a more robust transfer function or gamma curve for web, use gamma 2.2.
All right. Let's see. Couple questions. One from Sean and Maximilian. Uh, I've seen conflicting information on using iPhone footage in a DaVinci Wide Gamut intermediate project. What's your process for color managing that? And Maximilian chiming in saying, how do you manage projects with footage that can't be set in the color management, like flog 2, for example?
Oh, yeah, two really good questions. So for the iPhone stuff, I would refer us to the grading Rec 709 footage video that we did not that long ago here on the channel. Basically, put it this way, with iPhone or with any other sort of 709 baked material. By the way, what we were talking about earlier, like that big digest that we did on Rec 709, Gamma 2.4, Gamma 2.2, Rec 709C, and Rec 709A, sRGB, all that, like that insight that we called out of like, oh, those actually all have the exact same gamut, the exact same primaries. One of the times when it's useful for us to know that is in situations where it's like, how am I going to deal with this iPhone footage? Because we at least know the gamut of that iPhone footage, the gamut of that, mystery meat material that you're being given for your documentary or whatever it is that you're working with. The gamut of it, it's going to almost certainly be Rec 709 or sRGB. Those gamuts are the same, by the way. That part, you know. So it's really just a matter of fitting the tonality and getting you the best starting point for your grade. So as we talked about in that video, the options that I would look at would be as follows. You have, let's just pretend this is my input CST for a second here. So I would look at my input gamma. That could either be Rec 709A, Gamma 2.4, or Gamma 2.2. Okay, those would be kind of the input gammas that I would look at. And then you could look at whether or not you apply your inverse OOTF. Those would be the variables that I would play with, and I would play with them very naively and just try to get the best looking starting point for your image. All right, so that's number one there. And then the second question, jog my memory, Gadali?
That's about dealing with formats that aren't in Resolve natively.
Oh, right. Yeah. So we're asking like, what do you do when you have a format that isn't supported in Resolve? I tell you what I've started doing that I'm really having fun with. I go and talk to my community and say, hey, can we find the standards for this and can we build something that allows us to accommodate that input format? And I've been teasing this to you guys here on the channel for a while, but I promise we've got a large set or a significant set of input transforms for unsupported cameras that we're going to be releasing here on the channel for free very soon, because it sucks when that comes up. And what I've done in the past is either build myself or ask someone smart to build an input transform based on the published math of that color space, if it can be found. Oftentimes it can be, and it's just a question of there being a bit of a lag between it being out there and Resolve implementing it as a color space. But that's my first choice there. The other thing that I will do, this is I'll sort of cautiously give this prescription, this advice. If it's log format X and it's either an unsupported log format, or if you're like, this is clearly log, but I don't know what flavor of log it is, something else that you can do that I won't tell on you for if you make a good looking image come out the other end is you can bypass input transformation completely. Because remember, DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate, that's a log grading space. And if you don't know your input transform or you can't find one that feels like it's getting you to a better position, just skip the input transform and grade through the issue. I feel conflicted giving that advice because that's not very pure, that's not very scientific, but sometimes that's the best you can do and it can definitely work. So that's another option to you as well. Like if you got to leave grade school today and go grade a piece of content along those lines, if you can't find an input transform that is some flavor of log and some set of primaries that you can kind of reasonably guess to, then just skip it and know that you're probably going to have to decrease your saturation a little bit, and you're going to have to sculpt the high and the low end of the image to make sure that you're not clipping values out. So it's another option as well. All right, we got time for one more.
Okay. Let's see. Gotta make it a good one. All right, question from Alexander. How do you set up your look first at the timeline level and go back and do foundational work on a clip later? I think the question is more about what if the look is applied to something that isn't correct in the first place?
Yeah, this is another one that I actually really like. How it's been coming up in slightly different forms a lot lately, and I like it. And I also like the tone that I'm inferring from your question of like, how are you going to go and do that? How are you going to like have a shot that's out of balance and then establish a look based on it, and then grade it, and then expect that the look is going to travel on it? It's a good question. Here's what I would say. This is a difficult thing, but a really valuable thing to keep in mind. The another form that this question has often come to me in like the last couple months is like, well, dude, you're kind of giving yourself softball pitches because everything that you grade on your channel and everything that you grade in grade school has a certain level of quality to it, and it's pretty consistent. And meanwhile, I'm out here in the weeds and I'm grading projects with like bunches of different cameras, mismatches in white balance, mismatches in lighting, like big problems, and the footage is all over the place, and it's not feasible for me to set a look before I do shot level balancing on those shots. So how are you going to encourage me to do that? Like, that's been another common question I've been asked. Here's what I would remind you of. It's difficult to see sometimes, but I don't care. Let's take 10 shots and say, these are the 10 most unique shots. These are 10 shots that are like 10, they're a 10 pointed shape in space. They are like the maximum distance from each other. Not a one of them looks anything like any of the other 9. Okay? Like the extremist, most far-flung example you can think of 10 shots that don't even belong in the same edit. Okay? That's like literally the worst case possible scenario. Even in that scenario, there are common characteristics. You just have to find them. And even in that scenario, there is a shot which represents the median of ranges of contrast ratio, ranges of exposure, ranges of color balance. There's a shot which rests in the middle of all those others, and all the others are kind of radiating out. This one's higher contrast ratio. This one's more pink. This one's got a lower exposure. But there's one that represents the middle. And it's not always easy to find, but it's worth looking for. That's the one that you set your look on. And then you match or balance your other shots like alongside your look dev to line up with that shot. So it's not crazy. It is not wrong to say, like, I don't have a great example in this particular timeline, but it's not crazy to set a look in on that bullseye image that best represents the average or the middle of where the footage is coming into you at, and set a look there. And then you bounce over to shot number 2 and you're like, yeah, but shot number 2 is cooler. Well, so flip over to your timeline, or to your clip level grade rather, and warm it up a little bit. And now go back and evaluate, okay, now between my baseline shot and this new shot, does the look work, and do the two kind of agree with each other? So there is an interaction, there's a push and a pull. But the biggest thing I would remind you of is that even when things feel like they are completely disjointed and unrelated, and that there's no setting of a global look before you go in and grade each individual shot to align with all of its neighbors, there is a shot that represents the average, the middle, the center of like range of exposure, contrast ratio, and color balance. You just have to find that shot and start your look dev process there. And then from there, you're going to match that or evaluate that look on other shots. And you are probably going to need to flip over to the clip level and finesse your exposure, contrast ratio, and balance so that that shot is a bit more in line with your center bullseye shot that you started with. I hope that's helpful. I understand the question, and I'm really glad you're asking, because it's a real one. And you're talking about like one of the key parts of this craft to me. Anyone can do look dev when all the shots agree with each other and they feel really finessed and tight. It's a lot harder when you've got a more far-flung data set like we're talking about. That's a great one to end it on. Wow, that was a fast hour, guys. Y'all are awesome. Always enjoy hanging out with you guys on Friday morning. I don't think I have any announcements. Oh, by the way, did everybody check out the color code? The podcast came out last week. My interview with Andrea Kleback from Harbor Picture Company. Dang, that was cool. She is, I told her at the beginning of the episode, and I 100% meant it. She meant it. She is one of my absolute favorite colorists working. She has such a diverse thumbprint as an artist, and we had an absolute blast chatting. So go check out that episode if you haven't already. Definitely worth every minute of the whatever, like 80 minutes that we spent chatting together. We got more of those coming very soon. So if you didn't get a chance to go check out the channel, it's a video podcast too. So there's the color code here on YouTube. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those different places. Go check out that podcast, that episode with Andrea, and the forthcoming episodes. And you guys can let me know. I don't know. Let me know in the next community post. Maybe I'll put up a poll for you guys. What colorists, what motion imaging artists would you want to see me sit across from and talk with for an hour? I've got a list that stretches from here to the next block, but I'm always looking to add more to it. So let me know and maybe we can make that happen. I'll leave it there for today. Thank you guys very much for joining me for grade school today. Awesome session as usual. Have an awesome Friday and an awesome weekend. And I will see you guys here on the channel very soon. Take care.